Welcome, Dr. Quinetta Roberson. She is the Hanna Distinguished Professor at Michigan State University, previously on the faculty at Villanova and Cornell. She has a tremendous amount of scholarly expertise in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and she is conducting pioneering research into allyship, which is a topic, of course, at the heart of BreakLine. And when I think about this community that we are building together and our Big Ten approach to recognizing excellence in many different forms and across many different walks of life, I think about this opportunity that we have to back each other and to support, mentor, sponsor each other, and in short, to provide help to one another in the moments and the ways that matter most. And Dr. Roberson will help us examine how to show up for one another through this lens of allyship today. We're very, very lucky to have her insight and expertise. Dr. Roberson, welcome, and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Bethany. Thank you, Casey. Thank you to the whole BreakLine team for inviting me to participate in the summit on celebrating allyship. And also I want to thank everybody here. I know you're going towards the end of your day. For me, it's about 7 p.m. But, it's an important topic. And so, the fact that you're here, I look forward to the discussion. And so I emphasize the discussion because I'm not one of those professors who think that all knowledge flows to you. And as you'll see, there are a number of unanswered questions that we have around allyship. So I want to talk to you about the things that I think are important, but then also, kind of pick your brain a bit to see what we can do in order to in order to gain more insight into allyship, the value, the outcomes and impact, and strategies for being more effective. So to tap into the collective wisdom of the group, I'm actually going to start with a poll. So let me launch that. And if you think about allies, how valuable would you say allies have been to your career? Oh, it's ticking up quickly. All right, I'll give it about 10 more seconds. All right, we got about 80% of the people participating, so I'll share the results. So interestingly, about 50% of you said very valuable, and another 33% said valuable, which is not surprising given what we know about the outcomes of allyship. And I'm going to keep this up for one more second, because what we're going to return to, you'll notice, we've got to pay attention to the outliers. There were some people that said moderately valuable, some people that said, one person that said slightly, and one person that said not valuable. And rather than saying, we'll just focus on the 83%, part of allyship is to understand those other voices, right? And so why are there some people who say it hasn't been very valuable? But for the people who said it's been valuable and even very valuable, part of that derives from the outcomes that we know come from allyship. So if we look at research, we know, for example, that when we have allies, we actually have a greater sense of connectedness and belonging. And, in my work, I do work on diversity, equity, and inclusion, which, by the way, people will say as if it's one word, diversity, equity, inclusion, but they are different things. And in particular, inclusion is about having a sense of being valued and having a sense of uniqueness. So valued for your differences, but also having a sense of belonging, right? Being connected to something or somebody, other people. And so having allies is going to be important to that. I want to put an asterisk right there in terms of the importance of it, because I was reading, I like to nerd out. I don't just assign homework to students. And so I was reading a study about engagement. And it actually said that people's engagement and actually their sense of belonging is significantly less this year than it has been in the past. Of course, because if you think about, technology allows us to connect in a physical way, if you will, but it doesn't necessarily establish those relational connections, right? To see how people are really doing. When we would stop into someone's office and just say like, how you doing, etc. And so we're losing that sense of relating to others and connection. And so having allies may be even more important at this moment. There's also research that shows that having allies creates a greater sense of well-being, that I feel more optimistic. I feel it's more of a coping mechanism, right? I feel that I have a sense of resilience and just a settledness, right? Because, and it may be that I've got people who have my back. And so having that sense helps us be better at what we do, right? When we go to work, we can have the foundation to be our best selves because we know we've got that foundation. It also generates more positive work relationships. And so our connections to others and being able to work effectively with others because of the trust that builds up from allyship. And because of all of these things that I've discussed so far, it increases the level of engagement, satisfaction, and commitment, right? People are more ready to dig in because they feel good about coming to work. They feel good about the work. They feel good about the people they're around. Just as a sidebar, I don't know if any of your organizations use, to assess engagement, they use the Gallup Q12. But if you look at the 12 questions in the rubric, the strongest question is, I have a best friend at work. Now, I will say it's changed to, I have a friend at work because we're a very BFF culture. And so they found that many people were saying they had a BFF at work, but it's again, having this sense of connection and that people, it's difficult to not be engaged and it's difficult to leave an organization when you have those connections. And so we have higher engagement, satisfaction, and commitment. And then of course, as we know, it aids in career development and advancement, right? By having, as Bethany said, the mentoring, the sponsorship, the advocacy, we're able to navigate spaces that we may be unfamiliar with or don't necessarily have experience with, but we also, it serves as a way of skill development as well. And so there are all these benefits that come from allyship. And as I said, they may be even more important right now. Just as, I like to do my homework. And so I seized the opportunity when Bethany offered for me to sit in last week for Dr. Condoleezza Rice's talk. And I signed into that. And she talked about these outcomes being very important right now. She spoke to some of these. In particular, she talked about the soft bigotry of low expectations and how, in this moment, it's important to have to show kindness and to bring out, help for others. And so again, as we think about the pandemic and racial strife and all of these other things that we're dealing with, that allyship may be particularly important. So what, right? So I in my background, I'm a professor of management and psychology. I wasn't always so. I was actually a banker. And so I learned the WIFM, the what's in it for me. And so, where people say bottom line me. And so we talk a bit about the outcomes, but then the next question is, how do we get there, right? And so if we're going to experience these outcomes, what do we need to do? What does it mean to actually be an ally? And so what I want to do is I will launch another poll to see if, the collective wisdom on this second question. But here's the question. I'm asking about allyship. So which of the following do you think describes someone who is an ally? And please feel free to check all that apply. It doesn't necessarily have to be one, but which of those things describes someone who is an ally, in your opinion?
Quinetta,
yeah.
It's forcing me to just choose one.
Choose one?
Yeah.
Okay. I just saw Casey say, oh no, it's okay. So we'll see. Just pick the best one you think. We're agile, we're resilient. So pick which one you think best represents, and we'll go from there. Meanwhile, I'm looking at the chat, seeing that I'm with my people who enjoy nerding out as well. So we can go down some rabbit holes if you like. All right, I'll leave it open for a couple more seconds. All right, we got about 75% of the people here participating. So the most frequently indicated response is that an ally describes someone who is willing to take a risk that may impact their own, one's position, power, or status, and that may be their own or that of someone else. Second, and you know, whether it's statistically significant, there's, you know, we don't know, but there's is proactive and engages in action, without prompting from others. So someone actually does something without being asked, and is or is willing to address a situation even when the action may not be visible or acknowledged to others. And then a few people indicated that allies view membership in the dominant group as an opportunity to bring about change for others. And part of the reason I wanted to share that, because like I said, we have to understand, if we're going to be effective allies, we've got to understand what it actually is and what do we need to do. And so for this, I'm actually going to share my screen with you to show you what I think are some things we need to think about when we're thinking about being an effective ally, or what is allyship. So first and foremost, allies take action, right? That there are many actions that we can take in order to be allies in an organization. But allyship is proactive rather than reactive. What this means is, of course, what was indicated, that allies don't wait for others to ask. And it's important to note that, because some people may not be comfortable asking for allyship. And on the other hand, as Dr. Rice said last week, we may not see things in ourselves that others see. And so it's important to, you know, have people who are willing to kind of take that action and be proactive. But the other thing about the action is that we have to distinguish between doing no harm and actually doing. There's some people who attempt to be allies by supporting others. And I'm going to do a reenactment of that, because I've had this happen, where someone says, I support you. And my reaction is great, right? But I'm wondering what that actually entails. So there's a need to distinguish between expressions of support versus the provision of support, right? Which is more active. And in thinking about how this, you know, this dovetails exactly with BreakLine's mission, and I went to the, you know, BreakLine's values, and the one that says we believe margin delivers mission, there is action in that, right? It's about concrete. It's about, you know, prioritizing. It's about creating value. It's about deliver. These are action words, and it's results driven. So in order to, you know, be allies, we need to be able to, you know, capitalize on that action orientation. Another thing is that allies are leaders. When we think about leadership, let's take a step back before we even go to allyship, but think about leaders. Leadership involves visioning, right? Usually leaders are very good about seeing the end state or understanding what the ideal situation looks like. And being an ally is about having those same powers of vision, that we can determine what the situation should be for a member of another group. What's the ideal state for a member of another group? So for example, if I look around the room and I see that someone doesn't have a seat at the table or someone's voice is missing, it's not that I say, oh, we need to have all these different voices represented, but more so as a leader, I start to see what the missed opportunity cost, right? I start to see what we're missing in terms of benefits by not having that voice at the table. We're missing out on optimal decision making. We're missing out on creativity and innovation. So leaders are able to see kind of what's needed, and if we had those voices, or if we engaged in that allyship, what the world could be like. The other thing is that leaders are pretty savvy at doing risk analyses, right? They can kind of look at a situation and do a cost benefit analysis. They see what the ROI is. And so return on investment, my finance words, of course, people know that. But what they can see is, again, if those voices are not at the table, and I want to try to get those voices to the table, what's the risk involved? What is it going to take from me, right? What am I sacrificing, or what do I have to do? And so it takes this kind of analysis in order to do that. And again, going back to BreakLine's values, I think the value about being resilient problem solvers, right? Being able to see what the issue is and how to address that issue. Sometimes people talk about allyship as being event-based, but really savvy or really effective allies don't try to do things just for the moment. They try to get to the underlying issue, right? They address the root cause or the root problem. And so thinking about leadership in that way is important to effective allyship. The third thing is that allies are learners. Part of being an effective ally is understanding what others need, what you can do, but also what your impact is on others, right? It takes this listening and open-mindedness. I had a talk earlier today. I did a TED talk earlier today, and I was talking about having a growth mindset or a learning orientation, right? Thinking about things in terms of how can I do better? This like continuous learning approach. And that's what effective allies do, right? We may think that we're offering someone help, but maybe they don't need help. They need advocacy. And so it's up to us to kind of understand and listen and get that feedback on what's effective and what's not effective. So let's say, for example, that you're going to be on a panel and you get the information about who's on the panel, and you realize that there's a voice missing. Well, one strategy is when the panel takes place, you can take an opportunity to speak on behalf of the voices who are not there. But an alternative is, once you see who is not there, to actually try to use your position on the panel to make sure that the composition of the panel changes. And so you don't have to speak for members of a certain group, but you give them a space in order to speak for themselves. And I think that, again, as I look at BreakLine's values, that's about sharing energy. That share to me is what jumped out, because this learning is a dynamic process. It's not me just saying, here, I'm going to do this for you, but it's understanding that two-way process and something that's a bit more dynamic. And then finally, allies believe in being yourself. Part of the reason that we trust allies, and that when allies are most effective, is when they are authentic and they are consistent, right? And so we know that they're not doing something, they're not engaging in, providing support or engaging in advocacy because it's what all the cool kids are doing, or they're going to get some kind of reputational benefit from it, but they're actually trying to do some good, right? That there's something authentic about their motivations for it. But then the other side of that is that we know that it's just not a one-time thing, right? That it is consistent. What's interesting is saying, for example, that someone is an ally rather than someone demonstrating allyship. Because I've done research I do some research on unconscious bias, and we all heard of like the implicit association test by the people from Harvard and these various tests that you can take. But another way you can see if people are biased are by the verb forms that they use. So for example, if I say, Casey is a team player, and I say, Ryan performed well on his team. By using those two verb forms, I said Casey is a team player. I'm saying that's what she does. That's who she is. She is a team player. But if I say Ryan performed well on his team, I say he did it this one time. I don't know if he's going to do it again, but we will acknowledge that he did it this one time. What research shows is that this linguistic bias, we actually use more enduring words or verb forms when we're talking about members of our in-group and they do something positive. So I said Casey's a team player because she's a member of my in-group, women, right? We're women, we do great stuff all the time. She's likely to do great stuff again. Versus Ryan, you know, he's a guy, he was a team player. We don't know if he's going to do it again, right? But what happens is when the situation is reversed, when it's something negative, then I would use the more event verb, demonstrated, or something in moment for a member of my member of my in group, because we don't do bad things, right? So I would say, you know, Casey did not submit the project on time. Just saying she did this one time. Maybe she had some, you know, other responsibilities, or she was having a bad week. Versus if I said Ryan is late on the project. Well, late is enduring, and that's out group, and that's bad, and they do bad stuff all the time, right? And so that's how we actually see how people think of the actions that people do and the consistency in that action, and whether we can attribute that action to who they are. And we do the same for allyship. Do we say that someone is an ally, or they are engaging in allyship? Where engaging in allyship is something that is more event-based versus describing who someone is. So if we're really going to be allies, we've got to do those things that are more enduring. We've got to take action. We are leaders, we're listeners, and, you know, we have to believe in being ourselves. And of course, because any good professor understands a rubric or a framework, action leaders, learner yourselves, there we've got allies, right? But I'm gonna stop sharing for a second and we could come back to this. But part of, you know, we talk about what it means to be an ally. But we remember, going back to that first poll, not everyone said that allyship has been valuable to them. And so I want to, you know, if I'm allowed to say there's a dark side to this, I would love to explore the dark side of this. So I'm going to pull up another poll, and let's see. Sorry about that. I keep doing that. So here's the third question. And this one is a bit of a challenge, and this relates to research that I'm doing right this second. So which of the following words do you think best describes a person who receives allyship from someone else? So the person who's on the other side of the allyship. What is the word that you would use to describe that person? Oh, this is a single select as well. So I guess I should say which is the best one to describe, because we don't have the check all options. All right. Again, the nerd in me, because this is data collection. Like I said, I'm working on this right now, so this is fascinating to me. So I'll give it a few more seconds and then I'll show you the results. All right, so 50% of the people say it's a partner. So that would suggest I'm thinking that there is a partnership, in allyship. No one said oppressed, which is probably a good thing, but we'll talk about that. 30% said beneficiary, 17% said recipient, and 1% said target. What is interesting about this is if you read the scholarly literature on allyship, there is actually no term for the person who is on the other side. There is confusion in the terminology as to whether that person is a target, a recipient, a beneficiary. I've seen a few studies in like sociology and anthropology talk about the oppressed, but also there's research that talks about members of marginalized groups. But you say several people said partner, and there's not a lot of research that shows that. That was kind of I put that in to see whether, how people would respond to that. Because if you look at these different words, they have different meanings, right? Target, on the other side of target, is just someone who is, just on the other side. I am directing something to them. It doesn't have any valence attached to it. It doesn't say whether it's positive or negative. It just says that I'm directing something to someone. Recipient says that you're going to receive something from me, right? That I'm giving you something. But the question is, do all forms of allyship provide that, right? That you're going to receive something? Or could allyship also have an experience part to it? Beneficiary, that says that there is, you receive something, but it's something positive that you receive. And so one would think that in order to be an effective ally, you have to provide something positive. And then partner, again, that allyship is, I see in the chat, Lisa said reciprocal, or we could say dynamic, or it's something that is dyadic, but it doesn't involve just one person, or it's not just one way, but it involves this kind of two-way systemic kind of thing. What's interesting about this is that, like I said, we don't in research have consistency in what the other person is called, but what we think, and by we, I'm saying I think that this is maybe driven by people's motivation for being an ally. So if we look at what people respond to, when there's interview data, qualitative and quantitative data to see when, people are allies, why do they do that? And here are some of the responses. I help others who cannot help themselves. I want to demonstrate support for members of marginalized groups. I want to demonstrate an interest in social justice. I want to create benefits or improve the situation for members of marginalized groups. I want to enhance my own image or reputation. I want to share my power or privilege. I want to challenge systems of inequality. I want to change systems of inequality. As you can see, there's a range of motivations. And what we do know is that out of all of those motivations, a lot of allyship happens from the allies' reasons for engaging in the behavior. So we don't have as much evidence, and maybe you may have experienced this in your allyship experiences, but it's not necessarily about what's in it for you, but it's about what's in it for the ally. I can share a personal example. I recently had someone say to me, Quinetta, I'm going to be an ally for you. And I thought, okay, I didn't ask for that. I don't mean to seem ungrateful, but I'm good right now. And they're like, no, I'm going to be an ally. And I'm like, no, right? So we're negotiating. I'm trying to negotiate why I don't want your allyship. But, in the moment, what I was saying, here I am saying, I'm spending my energy saying, no, thank you, which if I had thought about the other person's motivations, maybe I would have had a different approach, because what that person was saying to me is, I want to help you. I want to do this for me. And so I needed to show them what was in it, or really what was not in it for me, and to highlight, how we could really make this, I teach negotiations, a win-win, right? So how do we both benefit from this? If you're going to be an effective ally, how can they think about the other side of the equation? And what's research shows that in addition to allyship being very much driven by the ally's motivation, that motivation also influences the type of ally behavior in which someone is willing to engage. So if I'm doing it for me, it means that people are less likely, I'll say if I am doing it for me, I am less likely to do more risky allyship, right? I'm less likely to engage in allyship behaviors because, again, this is about me. It's about my self-esteem and my reputation and everything positive for me. So in staying positive for me, I'm not necessarily going to stick my neck out or put my status or power or privilege on the line, because that goes against benefits for me. But if we thought about the other side of that, oh, I see we have another ally on the call. If we went about, thinking about the other side of that, then people are more likely to engage in behaviors that are more proactive, as we discussed in the beginning, things that may be higher risk, but also have higher return, things that are more private versus public, and so they don't want to necessarily get accolades for it, and also things that are more authentic. If I am doing things for you or for someone on the receiving end of that, or someone who's a target or a partner, and I'm thinking about that, then I'm more likely to do the positive things that are associated with allyship. So in thinking about being an effective ally, we have to think about, we have to ask ourselves and do some kind of self-reflection in order to be most effective. So here is my final polling question. And this is anonymous, so you can answer this however you like. But how often would you say you engage in allyship? And this is only one choice, of course, too. And as people are filling this out, I'm just kind of catching up in the chat, and I see this great, Brady put a BreakLine lesson from the past: negotiate shoulder by shoulder, not face to face. And so that takes that power and status or privilege out of the equation and makes it more, it equalizes it a bit more. So I wanted to underscore that. I think that's great. So I'll give a few more seconds. We've got about 70% of the people. Maybe everybody doesn't want to answer this one, but of course we have diversity in how often people engage in allyship. And 40% said sometimes, which I think is interesting, because another thing that Dr. Rice talked about were, what are the enabling conditions? Right? Which I think about, how do you allow someone to be great? And if we think about allyship as this dynamic thing, this partnership, sometimes may have in it that I don't have the opportunity to do it, but there also may not be those enabling conditions that allow me to do it, right? And so part of it is thinking about my actions, what am I able to do? But thinking about, is the situation such that I'm able to do it? I also wanted to, again, I find each of these answers, what's in it, to be fascinating, because it's interesting to think about, how are people always able to engage in allyship versus never, right? And the always is what I would consider to be, to some degree, an ideal situation, because Bethany and I talked in prior calls about allyship as a community, right? Or another way that I would think about it is creating a culture of allyship. something that becomes part of our DNA, right? Something that becomes unconscious, if you will, something that just happens, that it's consistent, it's positive, it's valuable, but there's these things that just continue to happen. So what can I offer to you or encourage you to do in order to, think about how often to do it more frequently, and also to have more impact and more positive impact. And I'll add a quick note about going back to what I said earlier about connection and belonging. I was teaching an exec ed class last week, and we were talking for a moment about connections and belonging and kind of relating to others. And I told a story about how I have two colleagues in my field, a husband and wife team, who, when you see them at a conference, they can work a room like nobody's business. They're shaking all the hands, they're kissing all the babies, they're getting all the cards, right? So however long that reception is, if it's an hour, they've got an hour, they've got all the cards, versus, 2 hours, whatever time they have, they can do it. But what's interesting is that if you talk to them, 3 months later, they have very few connections to the people from whom they got those cards. That those cards become the connection in and of itself, which we can question, is that really an authentic connection, right? Is that a connection, or is that just a card, right? Is that belonging? Is that relating to others? And what's missing in that card exchange is, what I put on my glasses for this because I'm going to use my scholarly words, but it's what we call social capital, right? So that's what makes us trust each other. That's what makes us want to work with each other and continue interacting with each other, because we have social capital. Social capital is basically what makes trust happen, right? Why we trust each other, why we continue to work together, how we can be citizens in our organizations. But what we don't know or think much about is what generates social capital. And social capital is generated by frequency of interaction and also the depth of interaction, the nature of our interaction. So think about frequency. If I go back to my colleagues, that one-time connection of getting a card and not necessarily interacting anytime after that, that limits that frequency, right? We don't have these opportunities to continue to generate that social capital. The depth is the authenticity, right? If I just have a card from you and then, I'm going to try not to be triggered on this because it happens, but you get an email from somebody a year from now who's like, hey, hope you're well. I was just wondering if, and you're like, who are you, by the way? Because there hasn't been that depth, that authenticity of connection, right? We haven't talked, there's the frequency, but also, all you have is my card. We haven't really related to each other. So as we think about allyship and being able to create this culture of allyship, we have to think about this frequency and being able to continuously, not only to, try to use our privilege and power and status to provide benefits for others, but really to be able to exercise that muscle, right? That I practice my allyship so that I start to, now I don't have to say like, on your mark, Quinetta, you're going to go do allyship, get set, but it becomes a bit more rote, right? Like that's who I become, an ally. I make it more enduring to who I am. But then also that depth of connection. I don't necessarily have to, be your BFF, or I don't have to know you in order to be an ally. But there's that authenticity, and that there's a deeper connection in that I am willing to engage in some kind of risk, and I'm willing to engage in some kind of action in order to make a situation better for someone else. And so what I would encourage, and I'm going to share my screen one more time, is 3 questions that I think that you can ask yourself as you aspire or attempt to create this, not only a culture of allyship in your organization, but kind of internally, right? How do we exercise that muscle? So that self-reflection, some questions to kind of ask in moment. This isn't rocket science. You don't have to sit down and kind of, ask yourself do these deep thoughts, but very quickly, what does the ideal situation look like, right? So what could be better? How could someone benefit? How could we be better? And thinking about what's that aspirational state. Second, what can I do to create that situation? There's two things in that. One is, of course, that action. What am I able to do? And there are a range of actions that, I could take. But of course, if we're being candid, there's going to be different levels of risk associated probably with the different action. So we have to think about also our appetite for that, right? What am I willing to risk, or how far am I willing to go? Am I going to put up a Zoom background that said this is a safe space and I'm an ally? Or am I willing to go into my meeting and ask for budget, or ask for, someone to change the slate of candidates, or something like that, something that, I have to do something a bit more. But again, in order to do that effectively, we have to find a space where we're comfortable. And allyship is not necessarily always comfortable, but the more we exercise that muscle, we figure out where that space is, and we're kind of willing to go a little bit further each time. It's kind of, I liken it to running. I was a sprinter in college. I didn't run anything longer than 200 meters. I thought anything longer than 200 meters was stupid. But then, and I would go probably up until about 3 years ago, I decided, how old am I going to be running wind sprints on a track? And so I just decided I'm going to change myself into a distance runner. And for someone who had only really run 200 meters, I had to, I'm going to go 400. Now I'm going to run a mile. Now I'm going to run 3 miles. And I've gone a half marathon. I'm not doing anything more than that. I can't wrap my mind around that. But you've got to exercise that muscle and can figure out, and elite runners and people who do marathons tell me you got to run through the pain and you got to do all of those kind of things. Same kind of things with this, diversity, equity, and inclusion work, with allyship. You got to run through the pain, right? It's not always going to be easy. There's going to be some critical conversations, some difficult dialogues, but we've got to push through and do that. And then third, is why do I even want to do this? And that's reflecting on a motivation. Is it because I want I want a pat on the back and someone said, in a meeting, I just want to acknowledge Quinetta, who is a really good ally? Or do I want to see that aspirational state that I envision? Do I see a way for us to be better by being an ally? Or do I see a way for the situation for someone else to be better? And then going back to that growth mindset or that learning orientation, the follow-up question is, after you've done something, what impact have I had, right? Because again, two things with that. One, we hope to have an impact, a positive impact, but my financial mind tells me what gets measured gets done. If I look at my actions and I don't have any feedback on what I've done, then I kind of drop it, right? I'm like, well, why would I go do that again? But if I can find out the extent to which I've had impact and whether it was good or bad, I now know how to adjust in the future in order to be more impactful or to be more effective. So overall, what I'm hoping is that this helps to frame kind of, we know the value of allyship and being associated with BreakLine. That wasn't anything new for you, right? You knew that. But then digging into what allyship is and the challenges associated with it, or those enabling conditions, so that individually we can do it and do it more effortlessly and more impactfully, but also as we go out into the world and go to our organizations and all these organizations that you are touching as leaders, being able to grow that allyship muscle in others and be able to create broader cultures of allyship overall.
Quinetta, very grateful to have had the time with you today. I know this has been an epic day for you. Lots of folks wanting to hear about your research and your insights. I know you have your wine chilling and that concert is coming up later today. Thank you so much for bringing your energy, your wisdom to our community. It's such a pleasure to hear from you. We're very, very grateful for your time. And thanks so much to the BreakLine community for joining tonight. Really a pleasure to see everyone.
Thank you. It was an honor for me. I appreciate to be able to be here and participate in the questions and the engagement. So thank you.
We loved it. Quinetta, thanks so much. Enjoy your evening.
Bye.
Take care, everybody.
Bye, everyone.